Hello and welcome to American Amnesia. I am your host, Cliff Garner, and you can find my work on Facebook at both on Cliff Garner on my personal page and also on my American Amnesia page. I also have gotten onto mine. Still haven't had the time to fiddle around with it. And it's under Clisario 2, just like it is here on YouTube, and also I've opened an account on Gab with Clisario 2, which is kind of an old nickname of mine. My name Clifford translates into Clisario in Spanish, and that's actually a name that I've used for a long time. I've been known by it, and for a long time I answered to it. And not only that, my name in Italian would be Clicerio. So that's where that's from. And actually, in ancient times, it would have been Glycerius in Greek and early Latin. So just kind of one of those weird things, and it mutated from a G to a cl. So that's kind of interesting how that worked out. Because usually a CL became a chi, right? And the GL often became something else, like a yeah or something. Anyway, I have been dealing with Turkey. When I get on lately, and Turkey is often on my mind because I lived there for so long, and I would like to talk to a couple things on there. And one of the issues you have to come back to with Turkey is that the AKP, the AKP party. The AK party, or as they call themselves, so that way that they're called the AK party, which means purity or white party. That would be they are the Turkish version of the Muslim Brotherhood. This fact is not well known outside of Turkey. And even inside of Turkey, it's not even really discussed much. They don't really think about it. But it is the Muslim Brotherhood. It's the version that cropped up in Turkey. When Banna's followers brought their ideas to Turkey, basically it went directly into the political process, and it became the roots of several political parties over the years that finally metastasized as the AKP. And they've been in power since 2002, 2001. I think it's 2002, actually. It was Erdogan who tried very hard to enter into the war in Iraq and helped Bush out back then, but the people of Turkey nixed it, and they told him, no, we don't want your war. And they did that with Syria also. While I was there, they were protesting every day until they closed down the Taksim Square. And what Erdogan did was he destroyed the square. The square was almost like sacred ground to the labor unions and to the communists and socialists, the various stripe. It was the site of an assassination where their leaders were gathered on the square, and they were doing their May Day rally, and they were shot at by snipers up in actually on top of a couple buildings across the way. I've talked about that with friends and discussed it. I think I don't think it got on the air, but I discussed it with my friend Herman Cruzy, and I also discussed it with Tom Bionic and a few other people. And this is one of the things that Erdogan did to. I can't say he was trying to consolidate his power, but what he was doing was he was tweaking the opponents, and that he was trying to keep them from ever again protesting on Taksim. Taksim is the center, the heart of the city in Istanbul, particularly on the European side. If you go down Bağdat, that's the main drag in Kadıköy, which is ancient Chalcedon, and that is at least part of the main city on the Asian side. Istanbul's on both the Asian and on the European side. It's the only Orel, Russia is also on the border between Europe and Asia, and it's on both. But Orel is nowhere near the size of Istanbul. Istanbul is probably the largest city in Europe. It's been larger than London for a few years now. And it's huge. They really don't know how many people are there. The reports when I was still there in 2014, it was as high as 18 million. Officially, it was like 12, and generally it's accepted it's about 15. I don't think it's grown too much since then. But it's a huge city, enormous. And Taksim Square is right in the middle. It's the old European district of the city, and it's across from the old city, just right across it. You cross the Galata Bridge, and you get onto the Golden Horn, and it's a remarkable place. I really miss it. Were it not been for Erdogan's violence, I might very well still be there. But the thing is that Erdogan was trying to consolidate ultimate power in his hands. He had been working on that all his life, and he was actually achieving quite a bit by being actually a reformer who brought in increased economic democracy and liberalism, as far as it goes, really. I mean, he was a conservative, but an economic free trader, basically. Not exactly. I mean, the Turkey's got all kinds of tariffs and stuff. I mean, it's a very controlled economy, but by the same token, opening up small business and being very relaxed towards it has been one of the strengths of the AKP, and it's been part of Turkey's prosperity up until just recently. He turned around and tanked his own economy back in 2013. And it was because he was really rushing to prevent the law from catching him. Actually, he, like Hillary Clinton, was running for office to keep from being arrested. And unlike Hillary Clinton, he succeeded. And unlike Hillary Clinton, he probably will stay out of prison. I think that Hillary is going to eventually get caught up to, and I have the funny feeling that Donald Trump is going to pardon her before he sticks her in prison. I think that would be actually smart politics, to be really blunt. But I have a couple articles I do want to get around to. See, what he did to consolidate power is this. He moved his office from being the prime minister into becoming the president. Erdogan was always the power behind the throne when you had Abdullah Gül as the president. The president was not really where the power was concentrated in Turkey. The office of the prime minister was always more powerful. The head of the party could be the prime minister, but not the president. The president was supposed to be above politics. And Abdullah Gül did a good job. He was actually a very, very fine president. And there were certain powers that the presidency had, ceremonial ones, but also diplomatic ones. And there were also certain emergency powers, because the president was above politics, that were invested in the office. Erdogan wanted to pick those powers up and weld them onto the powers of the prime minister. He had to do that by a special vote. He got the vote. It was a yes or no vote. This was done, I don't know, a little while back. I think it was 2015 maybe? Now that I think about it, I think it was 2015. And it was done, this was done in order to consolidate the two offices. And he got rid of Davutoglu, who was his puppet, that actually wasn't as compliant as that he was hoping he would be. He was compliant, but there were times where he actually broke away from what Erdogan was demanding. And because he had an independent streak, he was replaced with this fellow Yildirim, who's still there. And Yildirim is basically a dish rag. He's about as useful as you can guess. On a bull. So that said, Erdogan has managed to consolidate this power, and this past election he had to rely more upon his alliance with the MHP, the nationalists, the quasi-fascist faction of Turkish politics. They're extreme nationalists. They do have fascist leanings. There was the death squads of the Grey Wolves are directly connected to these fellows. Very creepy. But even creepier are Erdogan's personal vigilantes, who are called the Shroud Heads. And these are young guys that wear death shrouds, and they carry kebab knives that are about yay long. Well, like that. And they're serrated blades, and they're looking for trouble. Yeah, nice guys. Really nice guys. They're punks. But at any rate, this article is from June 29th of 2018, by Burak Bekdil. Burak Bekdil was one of my favorite writers while I was still there. He was fired. Actually, he was forced out of working at Hurriyet Daily News. It was actually the paper of record in English. Hurriyet had a very long tradition, and it was one of the last holdouts of the major opposition papers. They still have a few opposition writers, very brave and fine people, but the editorial policy there has become as nothing, really. I mean, it's gone down the tube. I don't remember the name of the paper that is Erdogan's organ in English. I never read it. I refused to read it. It's a piece of crap. Here at Daily News still remains the better paper of the two. But Burak Bekdil, a very brave man, was forced out, and he now writes for several publications. that actually keep track of Turkey, and he's as fine a mind and fine a writer as any. There's reasons I liked him very much. Erdogan hated him because of his sense of humor and the fact that it was often directed at him. Erdogan has more journalists in prison than China. Just kind of think about that for a minute. He has more imprisoned journalists than China does. It's amazing. And this article from June 29th, it's published on the BESA Center Perspectives paper. BESA is the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. And so you can well imagine this is a Middle Eastern think tank, and I think Bekdil actually works there. He also writes for a couple other publications, Gatestone Institute being one of the major ones, and I read from them last time. So, anyway, it says here, the executive summary: 4 decades after they emerged as marginal parties in the 1970s, Turkey's militant Islamist and ultranationalists won to combine 53.6% of the national vote and 57% of the parliamentary seats. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said in the past that he would make foreign policy in line with what my nation demands, highlighting the Islamist sensitivities of his voter base. He will now add nationalist sensitivities to that foreign policy calculus. This will likely mean confrontations with nations both inside and outside Turkey's region. And Turkey has a lot of different nationalities. There are religious minorities there. In the case of the Syrian Christians, these are also ethnic minority. It's a sticky wicket here. Now, this 53.6 of the national vote is the combined total of the two parties that are in the government now. This is the ruling coalition of the AKP, the Islamist party, and the MHP, the Nationalist Party. These nationalists, actually back in the days of World War II, were very strongly connected with the Nazis. Now, it isn't necessarily that they were persecuting Jews. They actually didn't. Really, that's been more of an Islamist tendency. Not that all Muslims hate Jews. I mean, you gotta keep in mind that all no. Some, yeah, even most in some cases, but you have to keep in mind that there's a lot of variety of opinions within Turkey, and that the MHP actually had more in common traditionally with the CHP, the Social Democrats, because those are the two parties that are what you call Kemalist. These two parties claim to maintain the traditions of Ataturk. And if you go to Turkey, one of the things you're going to get struck by is the fact that Ataturk is everywhere. He still is. Erdogan hates that. He doesn't like Ataturk, but the people adore him. At least the majority do. And the fact is he'll never be able to get rid of him. So Ataturk's on all the money, and he pays lip service to Ataturk and uses Ataturk to punish his opponents. He did that when I first got there. He had shut down YouTube. There was no access to YouTube for a couple of years when I was there. on account of the fact that somebody had posted a video making fun of Ataturk, the father of the Turkish Republic, whom I actually have quite a high regard for. The man was remarkable, but at any rate, Erdogan uses him to punish opponents when he can, and like I say, he gives lip service to him, and from time to time he'll slam him. But he's careful of which audiences he does that in front of. He won't do that in front of a nationalist audience by any means. The CHP, the Social Democrats, are actually quite nationalistic, but they are not. They're not as full blown as the MHP. The MHP, like I say, had some connections with or leanings towards the Nazis back in the 1930s and 40s, and that never really went away. They wanted to enter the war, and really it didn't happen. There was enough opposition within the country that it didn't occur, and not only that, the Germans didn't really demand it. They were content with just kind of having them there. So Istanbul was a hotbed of intrigue during the war, and a lot of various assassinations and back behind the scenes deals and stuff were going on there. And then after the World War II, the United States government approached Turkey and worked out a deal with them, and they became part of NATO pretty quickly. There was a lot of anti-Russian sentiment within Turkey. Okay, and there always has been. The only pro-Russian movement that's been within Turkey at all in their history has been with the communist movement. In fact, Turkey was the location. In fact, I've been to the house. I haven't been able to go in because it's not open. But if you go to Buyukada, which is Big Island, is what the name is. It's in the Prince's Islands. It's in the Sea of Marmara, and beautiful place, and a lot of old Armenian homes there. Go back a long time, but that's where Leon Trotsky initially went into exile, and that house has been allowed to go to hell. I mean, Erdogan has probably been pretty significant in making sure it's been neglected. But I understand that the socialists and there's also been money from outside of Turkey that supposedly they put into it, and they're cleaning it up. A beautiful home that has just been let go to total waste. It's a damn shame. So, anyway, it's too easy to get off topic. But this anti-Russian movement was a lot of why the Turks entered NATO in the first place. They also had their civil war, and during their civil war, that's when the Grey Wolves came to the forefront. And what that is all about, it goes back to a thing called Operation Gladio. And this was very well known in Italy, but it was also done throughout all of Europe. Actually, that there was in Russia and Ukraine and various Iron Curtain countries, there were caches of arms and money, communications equipment, and there were networks of spies, basically, that were coordinating behind the scenes this was part of Project Paperclip and all that, and the Gehlen Group being the Nazis' secret service that was pressed into the modern German Bundes. I can't think of what they call it. BND, I think, is the abbreviation. But they're secret police over there now. I mean, even today, it's like they're CIA and all that. And they were put into. There was a deal made. Let's put it that way, with the Gehlen Group, which started the post-war Cold War world. And this whole setup with all this, so the MHP was really the nationalist right-wing death squads, and Mehmet Ali Agha is actually Agha. He was the person who tried to kill Pope John Paul I. And he was a member of these right-wing death squads that are connected with the group called the Grey Wolves. This is the Mehepe. They hired out through the Bulgarian Secret Service Mehmet Ali Agha, and he went to kill Pope because in order to do the dirty work for the communists, actually. This was kind of like the last ditch effort by Gorbachev to do the Pope in and stop him from breaking Poland away from Russia, and that's really where all that comes from is that last ditch effort to stop the decay of the Soviet Union and its satellite countries. And Turkey was drawn into that. They were at civil war in 1980, and that was the year. That ended not too long after that, and the various parties that came around. There was always a religious factor in a couple of them that was promoting the ideas that the AKP would eventually metastasize. But the Constitution of Turkey would stop it from being allowed. And this is being a very important point. This was what Erdogan was up against up until, I'd say, about 2010. And that's about when all of that just melted away. He had a thing going on called Operation Sledgehammer, and this was part of the effort to take the secularized powers that were actually embodied in the army, and before that in the MIT. And which is their CIA, FBI rolled into one. That's where these anti-religious, actually they were pro-secular. They actually had a reason why they weren't allowing a religious party to dominate, because religion was fine, but the domination by a religious party was what they were avoiding. And there were judges, there were lawyers, there were prosecutors, there were police, there were MIT and the army. These were the main ones that were opposing Erdogan. And Erdogan, little by little, subverted every one of them. The last one to go were the judges, and he's just now taking them apart. He's imprisoned thousands of people with this, and we believe it's a fake revolution that was a rebellion attempt that was a couple years ago. The word I've gotten is he did it himself, and he did it so that he could round up his enemies and get rid of them. and the BPP, the Kurdish party that has enough votes to be in parliament. There's quite a few of those folks that are in prison. I mean, that's just the way it is. So anyway, that's a long explanation, but his 53% is not all his. He's got 42 or something, and the rest of it is from the MHP, and it's because the two of those parties have gotten their votes together, and they have enough. Anyway, Turkey's presidential and parliamentary elections on June 24th sent messages on many wavelengths. The voters asserted that the unchallenged popularity of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who is the longest-serving Turkish leader since Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey. They welcomed an infant center-right party, İYİ, which is good in Turkish. Çok iyi, very good. Right. Recognized the country's Kurds as a legitimate political force and gave a cautious nod to an emerging social democrat position, Muharrem İnce, Erdogan's closest presidential rival. Okay, so this is we finally have somebody that's risen up who can actually possibly defy him. One of the things about the Kurdish party, let me back up a little bit. But prior to the MHP joining this coalition, he had wooed the Kurdish group, and what he did with the Kurds is that he double-crossed them a little bit too early, and he started basically massacring Kurds in the eastern part of Turkey and on the borders with Turkey, and he thought he'd get a leg up on him because he was backing. Well, we were backing with him ISIS and al-Nusra and other small rebel groups in Syria. And what Erdogan was doing was that he was murdering the Kurds. He thought he'd get away with it, and it didn't. It backfired on him, basically. He lost his coalition. And for a brief moment, you had the three parties, the BPP, the Kurdish party, the MHP, the nationalists who are now with Erdogan, and the CHP. The three of them, if they would have gotten put aside their rivalries and anger, would have been able to form a coalition government and replace Erdogan, and they couldn't do it. The MHP refused to ever get together with the Kurds. And that did it in. And the obvious move after that was for Erdogan to woo them, and he did. And he's been on a roll ever since, although he's had to make compromises. These people have affected his policy. He's gone in more of a nationalistic direction on account of this, and there's other repercussions that have occurred, and there will be further ones down the road. Most strategically, election 2018 marked the official birth of an Islamist-nationalist alliance that will recalibrate Turkey's foreign policy calculus in line with the strong wave of religious nativist nationalism that brought this alliance to power. In power since November 2002, Erdogan easily won the presidential race with 53.6% of the national vote in the first round. Any number beyond the 50% mark would have surprised. Actually, with the 10% cutoff threshold, there's a limited number of parties that are even allowed in the first place, and they have a higher than 53% margin of votes. So they're actually at 57, I think. Yeah, 50%. So 57% of the parliamentary votes, and the reason is because that these smaller parties are not allowed in. Now there are some individuals who've got elected, but they're nothing. They basically what you have is power blocks, and there's only three parties, four parties that have representation at this time. And if one of them ever fell off sufficiently, then outside of forming a coalition, they will not be represented. But there's a couple parties that are just beyond the pale, and it's because they fall short of 10% of the vote. And those, some of those are important parties actually. One of them being a rather religious, very crazy party. By the way, I won't go there. In power since November 2002, Erdogan easily won the presidential race with 53.6% of the national vote in the first round. But the ruling Justice and Development Party, the AKP in Turkish, that translates to Justice and Development, won only 42.5% of the parliamentary vote, down 7 percentage points from its result in the elections of November 2015. Okay, you see what I'm saying here. So the 42.5% of the vote means that they needed the 11.1% that the MHP brought. And you can see they almost fell below the margin themselves. Which is interesting. This can could discombobulate their whole scheme of things if things happen the right way. I don't think it will, but it's a possibility. But they had only 42.5% of the parliamentary vote, down 7 percentage points from its result in the elections in the November 2015 election, and that's the one that brought him to power, by the way. The AKP brought him to power after briefly losing it to a potential coalition that never formed, the opposition. He had a kind of a lame duck ruler. There was enough of a majority within Parliament to pass laws, but he really didn't have the wherewithal to do certain things. So it's really kind of interesting. Poor bastard. The AKP won 293 seats in Turkey's 600-seat House, falling short of a simple majority of 301. Just short of it. This is why they had to continue to form a coalition with the MHP. They haven't been able to drop the MHP since 2015. I mean, it's just the way it is. He formed that alliance, and it's been carrying him around for a while. But they're down some votes. Had this been just another parliamentary election, the AKP would have been unable to form a single-party government. But legislative changes that followed to the April 2017 referendum now allow the political parties to enter the parliamentary race alliance with other parties. Okay, so they changed the law, and I think they got rid of the necessity of the threshold of 10%. As long as they were enter into an alliance with another party. So that's where one of these things where they've been tweaking stuff so that they hold on to power. The AKP for a while there was making laws retroactive to certain times in the past, arresting people, putting them in prison, and then changing the law back. Well, they'd love that in Chicago. Anyway, had this just been another parliamentary election, the AKP would have been unable to form a single-party government. But legislative changes that followed the April 2017 referendum now allow political parties to enter the parliamentary race in alliance with other parties. And that's when he got his yes vote, in which he consolidated his power. Erdogan chose as his ally the Nationalist Movement Party, the MHP, Milli Hurriyet Party, I think, Milliyet being the people, Hurriyet Republic, actually, which had its ideological roots in the militantly ultranationalist pan-Turkic ideology of the 1970s. Grey Wolves. Just to repeat that. On June 24th, the MHP won 11.1% of the national vote and 50 seats, bringing up the allied, i.e. governing, seats to 343, which gives the AKP-MHP alliance a comfortable parliamentary majority. 4 decades after emerging as marginal parties in the 1970s, Turkey's militant Islamists and militant ultranationalists won a combined 53.6% of the national vote and 57% of the parliamentary seats. Erdogan has said in the past that he would put foreign policy, quote, in line with what my nation demands, end quote, highlighting the Islamist sensitivities of his voter base. He will now be adding nationalist sensitivities to that foreign policy calculus. This is likely to mean confrontations, perhaps bold ones, with several nations both inside and outside Turkey's region. And I will say that this will be not a very comfortable thing for the Arabs, his most direct neighbors. The Arabs, there's a lot of ethnic nastiness between the two, and it's kind of interesting when they live over there. Turkey's new ruling ideology will, first of all, make it practically impossible to return to the negotiating table for peace with the Kurds. That is an MHP red line that Erdogan will prefer not to cross. MHP's militaristic posture will also boost Ankara's desire to show more muscle in Kurdish-related disputes in northern Syria and northern Iraq. MHP's only solution to the Kurdish dispute is military might, namely killing them. That is his final solution. The AKP was trying to accommodate the Kurds through the religious angle, and they were appealing to their religious conservatism. One of my favorite students was actually a member of parliament, part of the AKP, who was a Kurdish headman. He was a regional leader, actually. He's a professor too. The guy was brilliant. He'd sit there and clean his guns when I was teaching him. It was kind of interesting. Turkey's decades-long obsessive foreign policy goal include making Jerusalem the capital of the Palestinian state, asserting an ideological kinship with Hamas, stoking sectarian hostilities against Syrian President Bashar Assad, and making threats about drilling off the shores of the divided island of Cyprus. Now, the Greeks are not real keen on that. Neither is NATO, the rest of NATO. To these will probably be added an Uyghur cause, a subject about which the MHP is particularly sensitive. Being pan-Turks, the Uyghurs are Turkic people who live in Xinjiang, which is western China. It's actually called Chinese Turkestan. And there's not just the Uyghurs living there. There's some Kazakhs and some of the other people from the region, that same region, and they're all Turkic speaking. Not all of them. There's some Iranic speaking ones too. But there's a lot of tradition that goes back probably as much to Genghis Khan as anything, and this it's rather interesting how the ethnic kind of thing here has retained. However, the Turks are no longer too terribly interested in involving themselves with the Mongols, and nor are the Mongols very eager to get involved with them. Really interesting situation. But the Uyghurs, their big problem was that when they tried to break away from China, they reached out. The only place that was even willing to listen to them, which was Al Qaeda, and this is a problem. This is a big problem. The AKP's election manifesto stated an intention to overcome problems and improve bilateral relations with the United States. But the manifesto also said Turkey would make an effort to improve bilateral relations with Russia. It said, quote, "We will continue to our close coordination with Russia on regional subjects, especially on Syria," end quote. In practice, Erdogan's balancing act between Russia and the U.S. resembles Brazilian dictator Getulio Vargas's pendulum policy during World War II. Getulio. Vargas offered support to Hitler and Mussolini at times, but ended up siding with the Allies. As a matter of fact, that was kind of the upshot. MHP's involvement in government policy will be totally irrelevant when it comes to operating the modern-day Turkish pendulum. Erdogan's relations with the U.S. are ideologically hostile but de facto transactional, and they will remain so. So he's going to deal when we deal with it. His relations with Russia are largely transactional and will probably gain further ground politically as well as militarily as the discrepancy between Turkish and Western democratic cultures widen. Erdogan ideologically belongs to the strongman's club. He also is a very palsy-walsy with Iran and has been for a long time. In 2013, he tanked the gold market on the international gold market because he was sending money to Iran through the gold market. He was laundering money that way, and he was buying petroleum, breaking the embargo that was supposed to be strictly enforced by the Obama administration. Yeah, well, there you go. As Turkey's gross democratic deficit, largely created under Erdogan's governance, is blended with the MHP's notoriously isolationist, xenophobic ideology, Turkey's theoretical goal of accession into the European Union, the EU, right, will gradually become null and void. It's not going to happen, folks. It's just not going to happen. He doesn't want it. They don't want it. And the MHP doesn't want it. It's not going to happen. I mean, they might as well not even go there anymore. It's over. The Turkey's theoretical goal. Erdogan will soon announce plans to shut down the ministry dealing with the accession negotiations with the EU and turn it into a department of the foreign ministry. This should not surprise anyone. And then you have the notes from Burak Bekdil, and it's an Ankara-based columnist. He regularly writes for Gatestone Institute and Defense News, and is a fellow of the Middle East Forum. He is also founder of and associate editor at the Ankara-based think tank Sigma. As I say, one of my favorite writers in Turkey. Very brave man. It's a wonder he's still there. But a lot of people hung on, and they're continuing the good fight. So this last election and the upshot from that, what's going on here, you need to understand that the marriage of the AKP, the Islamist party, and Erdogan's party, no less, with the MHP, which was Kemalist, that although they broke away from this JHP, the Social Democrats, completely now. This marriage of convenience, the nationalist, right-wing nationalist death squad group with the Islamist, potentially very fanatical religious party. Not that it's all fanatical now, mind you. Not all of it. But there is that element there, and it is wacky. And there are some wacky things coming out of the MHP in this wedding too. It's getting freakier and freakier by the day, I'm sure. I haven't been there for a while, but I'm going to guess that this marriage has been interesting to watch, the consummation. I have heard that the persecution of Christians is up, ethnic minorities, persecutions are up, that there's beatings in the streets a lot of places. I was told that I didn't want to go back, and it sounds to me like I don't. Pray for the people of Turkey. And until next time, take care.